Oh, it's great to see everybody here. I'd like to welcome back Mary Gay Ducey. I could tell you about her storytelling nationally, internationally. I could tell you about her awards and her chairship and her good works, but I'm not.
Thank you.
What I am going to tell you is what I came away with last time I was able to spend a session with Mary Gay. And I will tell you what she gave me were skills and knowledge that upped my confidence so that I could take a story and make it my own. And I could take a story and I could tell it freely, which for me was a big deal. So I am hoping that in your pursuit of storytelling, you will pick up some skills and knowledge. And I am completely confident that Mary Gay is the one to do it for us. So, without waiting longer.
Thank you. How gracious. How about a story first? Just a little, it's actually just a little storylet. It's a sort of a whisper of a story. And nothing yet. Just listen for a bit. Once there was a very brash, imagine that, young man, imagine that. Very brash. And in the sort of tradition of young, brash men, he believed that his elders were there in order to feed him and to listen to his collected wisdom. He had reached the apex of human wisdom, actually, around, adolescence, as some of you know, I'm sure. And he made his feelings known quite often and loudly about a variety of topics. Welcome and not so welcome by those in his community. So it came to be that they were people walking along the path, when they saw this clever fellow, would pick up their pace because they'd heard pretty much the whole thing. But that didn't stop him. He loved to hear his own voice, and he was so interested in what he thought he might say. He was interested in his own opinions first. There was, of course, a person who was venerated in that community, and the person who was the quietest, actually, and of an age. And he did not know the boy well, but he knew of his reputation. One day the boy got up quite early, as was the custom, but even earlier than that, when the sun had just begun to beckon. He came that way early, as his friends had done, as his ancestors had done, as his family had always done, early up, early to bed. So he came upon it as a family tradition, and a good thing too, because good things can be found in the earliest part of the morning. He lived by the sea, and it was so early that all of the sea birds were still asleep. There was hardly a sliver of light, and yet there was enough. So that as he made his way down to the edge of the sea, he saw that someone was there even earlier than he was. He wasn't pleased about it. First person gets the good things, but also everything to this young man, this child, this boy now man to be, was ready to compete, ready to be measured by others. He didn't know who it was, but there was a man standing at the water's edge. That night, the night before this, he knew from the other people that there was going to be a great rough sea coming in. Very rough. High waves. And who could tell what they might find afterward? Meat? More wood? Anything. Because the sea gives, of course, as it takes away. And so he made his way down, carefully avoiding this other fellow, and he saw on the beach, as far as one could see, crab after crab after crab after crab, a foodstuff of great importance. He thought, how much of it can I carry back? Being a young man. I could carry a lot of it, he said, being a young man. And then he saw that the fellow was picking one up. Oh, he said, I better do it in a hurry. He's going to get everything. But oddly enough, the fellow, he was of an age, as I say, picked up the crab, holding him by the back, of course, and then he threw it back into the sea. Now, the sea continues its work whether we are here or not, and the waves sweep up whether we are here or not. And yet, it was gone. It managed and started to scuttle its way, that tiny little creature, down and burrow as fast as it could. And yet, with the very next wave, there were more. More. And the old fellow picked up another one and threw it back in. The boy watched this about 3 times, and he couldn't help himself. He couldn't help himself. Imagine that in a young person. So he went up to the old man and he said, why are you doing it? The old man never looked at him at all. He just picked one up and threw it back as he watched its brothers and sisters come in. He said, why do you ask? The boy said, well, it doesn't matter. The old man stopped for a moment and looked at him and said, no? No. Every time you do it, hundreds will come up. Why would you waste your time like this? Because there are things to do every day. Yes, yes, said the man. There are. It's true. There are so many coming up, even as I throw one back. That's what I'm telling you. It means nothing. How can you waste your time like this? And as he said that, the old fellow picked one more and threw it back in. It means nothing, he said. And he turned and said to the boy, it means something to that one. And so it is that from all stories we hear wisdom whether we choose to receive it or not. What do you think about that story? Now let's not be quiet. Because if you're very quiet, then I'll call upon you. And that's not the best way. Think now. If you volunteer, then the others owe you a debt of great weight. And then you can call in that debt any old time for higher value. Yes?
Okay, I think that's a wonderful story because I like stories that teach a lesson. They are not preaching. And I think this was just a wonderful story that teaches a very, very subtle lesson.
Anything else? Yes?
I have heard that before, but it was with sand dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So that it shows you can use
It was heard before, another variant heard before that was sand dollars instead of crabs. Anybody else?
Well, I found it slow and very quiet. It's a very quiet story, which could be useful with some of our children because it kind of quiet them down, and yet there's something compelling about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I like the contrast between the brash young man and the person of a certain age.
I like that myself. Anybody else?
I like the way you kept the suspense in it till the very end, and then that was the punchline, and we were all wondering, once he got to the beach, what on earth?
What on earth? Yes. And then?
I like the way you told the story because you had
had a twinkle in your eye, you were quiet, and you had an air about you that there was more to come.
Thank you.
On the same vein, I liked your tone. It almost made me feel I was at the beach watching the waves come and watching the waves.
Oh, I'm glad of that.
That was really a lovely picture.
Last one, Jeff.
Put us in an interesting position because we were like the young man. We didn't have any idea what this guy was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we didn't identify. We wanted to identify with the person of a certain age,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't actually know.
Mm-mm.
So we felt, sort of conflicted, I think. Ignorant at the same time.
Yes, yes, that's true. Anything you want, anything missing from that story? Anything you'd like to know, wish I had said? Is there anything not quite there? In other words, what question might you ask about that story, having heard it?
So did it make a difference on the young man?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? You sure? Yes.
The size of the crabs. Crabs aren't all alike. They come out of the ocean.
No, well, that's certainly true.
So it was, at the beginning, I was not sure where you were, what particular crab they were throwing back until you did the hand thing.
Mm-hmm. And even then,
Well,
there are.
but your hand was this way, and if it was smaller, it would have been.
Yes, it would have been. But you'd have to know that. You'd have to know that there are crabs of different sizes.
One more comment about what I like, the interchange between the old man and the young man. The old man never answered with an answer, he answered with another question.
That's right.
And that's,
In a traditional manner, yeah. That's it? Yes.
Just an interesting point is it didn't matter geographically where you were. The story could apply almost anywhere.
Well, it could, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could. It could, but, and it can be told that way, and I've heard it told that way many a time. So stories have good bones, usually. That's folk tale material. Folk tales, fairy tales, myths, legends, fables are all dusted off, polished up in some way down to the very last part of them. There's no excess, usually, in traditional stories because there's a little room for the teller. A little room for the teller to interpret, as all of us are different tellers, for sure. But there's something else, and that is that they have to be pretty portable, that kind of story. It can't be so extravagantly detailed. Mostly myths can be, but folktales particularly can't be so extravagantly detailed that you'd have to quit your day job to learn it. You know, I don't think that story is. I mean, that story is something you can learn as you cross the street, really. And yet, don't you wonder a little bit? Specifically, I noticed that the crabs are the right size or a different size, and so you know by the size of the back of the crab what size it is. We know on this coast and other coasts it could be like this, couldn't it? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it isn't, or it might be. So this story is devoid.
Or it could have been this way.
Yeah, it sure could have. Yeah, sure could have. But this story appears to be, at least at first glance, devoid of cultural information, almost. Anything in there that you can identify as culturally specific or suggestive of a culture?
It's a coastside culture.
Pardon?
It's a fishing side.
It is, good. So we know it's on the edge of the water and you can catch things from the ocean's bounty. Anything else?
It's tribal, because it's a small group of people, all who know each other,
Mm-hmm.
and who have a family traditions that even brash young men follow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. You notice, I don't think, if I did, I made a mistake. I never said the word tribe. I said community, on purpose. Anybody else? Yes.
The early rising,
Yes.
make that early on,
Non-urban, non-village, basically. Got to get up. The sun is the master of awakening in this story. Anything else? Any cultural information or not?
Well, you'd think in many Asian cultures, the veneration of someone older would come into play, but that's not the case with this brash young man, even when he approaches an older person. There was none of that veneration.
Of course, there's a reason everybody walks faster as he comes along, because they know that. So the question there is that typical of young people behavior in that place, or is it not? And once he is brought up to book by the elder, will that change his behavior? Will he be abashed? Will he at least learn that there's something to be said for the words from an old one? Hard to tell, so to speak. Anything else? Any other cultural? Yes?
Pisces tend to be related to certain areas of the world. So
That's right.
you could kind of extrapolate and say, Ireland maybe, was more subjected to Pisces, turbulent weathers. So.
Yes, rough. So if you want a story to express or not express its antecedents, its ancestors, its place, then the story you choose has to have those details in it. But sometimes, even though there are those details, it doesn't have that stuff in it. Doesn't. Because after all, who collected stories, written them down, who collected them, really, and brought them back to some place where they could be disseminated? Well,
I was just going to say that this is so interesting to me with the cultural context, because I've heard this story a number of times with Starfish, and always at mentoring organizations where older people are gathered and they're trying to raise money for the mentoring organization, and it's a part of the ask, the story, and this is the legs that traveled in our culture. Probably 3 times at least before today.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know, I've been in venues. So its context is very fungible.
It is.
And quite useful for raising money.
Well, and of course, I know that all of us have that in mind when we tell stories. As befits a sort of threadbare band of artists, indeed. Yeah, that's true. You could take a story like that, as this one has been taken, and almost, not quite, but almost strip it of its identifying, as best we know, its identifying characteristics. But in doing so, you impoverish the tale. You impoverish the tale. That doesn't mean it can't be used as almost as an epigram, almost as an anecdote. It can. But it's so much more interesting and so much more important if we know, at least as best we can, being outside a community, as best we can, who is speaking, where are we, what's going to happen. The sort of, the basic, sort of, you might say, the legs that hold stories. One leg is almost always place. There's place. There's voice, who's speaking, and not just who's speaking, but voice in the largest sense. What point of view is taken by whom, right? And of course, character. And in some ways, without those elements, it falls oddly on our ears. Didn't you wonder a little bit? I mean, where are we? Where are we here? So your ears and your embedded information about story, it knows better than you do sometimes that something is amiss. But stripped down, it still makes a good story, not a rich story, not a culturally engaged story. And your job collectively and our job universally is in the business of swapping. That wasn't always the case, you know. Your group and the wonderful, truly wonderful service, irreplaceable service that the Asian storytellers provide for young people That's an unusual thing for kids to have, really. It is. And you find yourselves, and I find myself very, very often, in the position of a borrower, a poacher, and an interpreter. That's quite an important role. And I'm not sure any of us can really qualify to say we can do that. In the old days, and not so old, the stories stayed within the village. Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Might be somebody who'd intermarry and take the story over here, or someone else might take it for some reason over there. So the story spreads for sure, but fundamentally, folktales in particular are timeless and also specific. They are timeless and easy to access for us, but they are almost always culturally specific, which is why when you don't hear what it is, it sets up a kind of a cognitive dissonance, really.
Having you explain that made me understand my feeling, because I didn't have a sense of satisfaction when it was
Good.
finished.
That's right.
And I just said, well, it is a good story, but, and I think part of it was because we were denied all these things that you said, but we didn't have an opportunity without the additional facts to develop a sense of empathy with any of the characters. And so, thank you for your explanation.
1, 2.
My feeling was this was such a universal theme
It is.
that it didn't matter what culture it was in. And if I was thinking, if I were going to tell this to a group of kids who lived in a desert, I might go in with a picture of a crab and we talk about water and kind of explain it, because the story is really effective with the crab. I suppose you could do something else, but I thought, here they can learn about all kinds of things. But it's such a universal theme that culturally didn't bother me. I thought, this is great. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
I would echo the same thing. I liked the fact that you did not give us a cultural specific thing, because we didn't bring anything to it, and our own stereotypes, impressions about it. So I kind of liked it the way you
In its spare form. Thank you. And would you tell it that way to the kids? If it was part of your training, if it was part of the rich materials that you need in every way to know well, would you use it in that spare form? Why not?
Because kids can fill in.
Wait.
I think not only children, but everybody, it helps to set a visual picture, and especially for kids, because of their imagination. I think they need visual details that flesh something out to make it all come alive.
So the sense memories in there, what it feels like, looks like, who's doing what to whom, actually, that alone.
I think it would depend on the age of the kids. You'd want to modify it. You'd have to change the picture that you were painting for a particular age group. I mean, a really young kid wouldn't quite get it the way you told it. But with some little changes, they certainly relate to kids who are know-it-alls. So you could definitely pull that up, and that starts really young.
I think part of our job is to embed a story or give it a cultural context. And so the thing about this story, of course, you could give it a context. In any of the stories we tell about Asia in general, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, you could do that. And it would be interesting, I was thinking to know, I just projected Japan onto it, because it just fit really well with Japanese. I'd like to know what the old man was wearing, this old man, and how that differed from what, I wanted to know what the young man wore. Was he puffed up with colors or whatever? The old man, was he in diapers, or was he, like an old Gandhi? Or was he, that kind of thing. I mean,
I guess it depends.
Yeah, but I wanted to know, I'm sorry.
Oh, what did you say? What kind of group is this?
Diapers are.
Oh, the impudence. Yes. And then you.
I'm a little conflicted because I think on one hand, the telling, as you did, very sparse like that, and in that quiet kind of way with pauses, allowed the listener But on the other hand, I understand also about, offering a little bit more, so that the viewer maybe doesn't have to work so hard. Maybe with kids, that's what we need to do more of. But for me, I really like the sparse telling of it, because I think it's like if you see the Disney Cinderella early on in your life, whenever you read Cinderella, you're going to think of that, rather than your own image of what could Cinderella be. She could be dark skinned, she could be tall or slender or wide and short. So I'm a little conflicted about that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the story needs it, but it provides an opportunity for us. We are trying to use stories as gateways into a culture, and into Asian cultures, and into art. Then there's the opportunity to take this story and make it very Japanese, or very Chinese, or very Korean, or very whatever.
You can.
And so along the way, while the story is sort of pulling them through, it's like walking into a Japanese village. You walk down the street, and you don't even have to have everything pointed out to you, but you see things. And when you get to the other end of the village, you know more about what a Japanese village is like than you did at the beginning. And the story can be that same. It can be that walk through a Japanese community, and you can put a lot in there without saying, now, notice this, and you should know, So it's an opportunity.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, here's something to think about for all of us. We find ourselves as storytellers almost always in folk material, not always, but almost always, we find ourselves in a position of borrowing or poaching, more likely, poaching stories from traditions that are not our own. And so we only bring a certain amount of background and information ourselves to that story. We can't know. Really, we can't. Not with traditional material particularly, which is older than old. And indeed is the kind of form that is built for improvisation, as we've said, but almost always culturally grounded. Almost always. Why? Because it belongs to somebody. It reflects the people. It reflects the values. It reflects what it is to be there. It reflects topology sometimes. Seasons, different seasons. Sand as opposed to ocean, for instance. So the more we know, the better we can convey the information as borrowers, as strangers to that tradition. What's particularly important is that we see it as something to treat well. And if you change that story, as I have, but only a teeny bit actually, then you make the devil's bargain to some degree, because we can't know. We can only tell what we know about a story. And when we as outsiders read a story or hear a story, then we are outside. And we can only know what there is available. Now, this doesn't mean quit your day job. It doesn't mean that, because story research and story sleuthing is the most delicious part for some of us, sort of story wonks like I am, and that's great. But that doesn't mean you're going to have to know everything to do everything with regard to a story. But it does mean that you treat the story with as much respect, as much care, truly, as you can, as you are able to. Taking into consideration your audience. Right? There's a lot of stuff to be said about cultural integrity, and then you get 45 kindergartners. And I'm thinking, yeah, cultural integrity here. Yeah, we're going to have to work hard on that. Good luck with that. And yet, you are the ambassador, however briefly, for a culture not your own, very often. And even if you are within the same culture, you are removed from the time of that story, probably, by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So there are those who are worried. They worry about borrowing stories in that way. And that's good. You should worry a little bit. You can commit quite a series of gaffes if you present a people, an episode filtered through Western eyes, right? Not quite clear about what a particular thing might be in the story, a symbol, what can you leave, what can you take? Those are complicated questions. They really are. And you are, after all, just borrowing, really. And here's the big deal. You're telling it to people who, by definition, think you know it. As much as they wiggle and scream, kids consider, I mean, you're the grown-up, man. You must know everything about it. So what you do and what you say, so entertaining, isn't it? So what you do and what you say is, as I best know, this is how this story is. And there's some ways that we'll talk about a little later that you can make your own borrowing and poaching accessible to the kids, what you know and what you don't know. So that story actually is from the northwest coast of the United States. It's told, it's told among the Tlingit occasionally, and there are hundreds and hundreds of variations, hundreds and hundreds. And there are also hundreds and hundreds, as you say, from other seas, other oceans, which is really good. That's why there are at least 7,000, no lie, variants of Cinderella, because stories travel, or do they? Depends on how Jungian you are. Some of us might say that the story is already embedded. It's archetypal, right? Something's in there that recognizes something else. But at the very least, we know that people travel, and we know that stories do too. So somebody heard it with sand dollars, I with crabs. There are dozens of variations. And you could also decide, well, maybe we'll just make it a whole other deal. Unfortunately, you and me, we're not in a position to play fast and loose with our stories and our antecedents and our sources. We aren't. But you can't give a completely full exercise in the culture in order to tell that story to kindergartners, or you know what'll happen? You know how they are, right? And there'll be Velcro ripping and ripping and ripping. They're really good at telling you what's going on, aren't they? Aren't they? I once attended a storytelling session, poor guy. First time the guy had ever told stories, and I was in the audience, and it was an audience of a bunch of families and little bitty kids, and all the kids, God help the fellow, were all squished up in the front, because parents think, understandably, put them right up there so they can see well. The kids are thinking, put us right up there so they can't see us well, right? And so it was a pretty long story. It's like trying to do, the Iliad for third grade. So finally, the kids had it, man. And these were preschoolers. They were 4-year-olds. Finally, I swear, one kid stood up and said, "Bye, Mr. Paul," and they got up and left. Smart kids, So you can't give them all the dope you've got. You can't. Instead, you have the difficult task, actually, of forming context, as much context as you can reasonably give, and that is accessible, right? And at the same time, being aware of attention span, and even more of what makes a good story, really. Thoughts or comments before we go on at the speed of light? Well, why not? Oh, man. Okay, have to be more then. You have the opposite issue, I think, of some kinds of storytellers and stories. You receive the story itself, right, in a cultural context, as is more than appropriate. That's your charge, among other things, right? So you receive it not usually in told form, though, but in written form. Now, it's quite a passage from the oral tradition and the written form. And I know that your job, just as is the job of every storyteller who uses stories that are in print, is to prise that story off the page, to free it from that space, and to make it alive, right? Sometimes that's hard, sometimes it's easy. There are two kinds of storytellers. There are planters and there are pruners. There are people who begin their stories when they are trying to accommodate a new story, and when they tell it, they basically tell the most spare version that can be told. It's the way they are. And then there's the planter. That sucker wants to tell you every single thing that was on the page. But that can't happen. Or it's, bye, Miss Gay. Bye, Miss Gay. So your job then would be to find the story and free it at the same time that you give it a little courtesy, give it a little cred, give it a little respect. You like it? So give me an example of a story that not within this tradition of telling here. Give me an example of a story that you've known, seems like just about forever. Doesn't matter what it is. Folk material though. Three Billy Goat Scruff. Anything else? Chicken Little, yeah. Anything? Jack and the Beanstalk. Piggies? Yeah. Oh, one of my favorites. Red Riding Hood. Good.
Hansel and Gretel.
Yes. Hansel and Gretel. Mm-hmm. By the Brothers Grimm, aptly named. Mm-hmm. Very aptly named. Mm-hmm. What? Sleeping Beauty.
Rapunzel.
My favorite, Rapunzel. Yeah. Snow White. Mm-hmm. You know, the real interesting person in that story, of course, is not Snow White, right? It's the Queen. Yeah. Anybody else? That's it. Johnny Appleseed. Ooh, what a good one. Not, as you well know, not a folktale, but a legend. A real guy. A legend being something that contains some center of truth that is unverifiable. True.
Like Paul Bunyan, I suppose.
Oh, what good examples. Yes. Here's one. May I go off text for a moment? There's a timeout. Paul Bunyan, as it turns out, now that's the way I learned it, as a traditional tale, right? It was in my 5th grade book. I mean, it had to be true. Yeah.
I think it was Babe the Blue Ox, but it was
Babe the Blue Ox.
bigger than life.
Bigger, yeah, very big. So really a tall tale as well. Literally a tall tale. However, it was actually an advertising campaign. Yes, it was. A very well thought out advertising campaign, and it was really, really effective because we loved that Blue Ox Babe and that big fella, so appealing. But it wasn't in any way related to folk material. It was somebody's good idea, and they ran it up the flagpole, and everybody stood up and saluted, and that's why you've got it today. Really true. Take a look at it. Well, no, but then you don't live in the time when it was closely and easily associated with product. Paul Bunyan, what did he do for a living? Why, yes, he did. Chop down trees, didn't he now? Mm-hmm. So take a look. Take a look in Wiki, the place where all truth resides. So those stories that you knew from childhood, how did you learn those stories?
By hearing them.
Hearing them?
Having them read to me.
Having read, yeah. Anybody else?
Let's pretend I'm ready.
Oh, let's pretend. Why, excuse me, I'm all aflutter. I believe that's the same station that had Big John and Sparky. How many of you know who that is? By God, I knew we were aging. That was a good show. How about the relatives who told it to you? Were they the ones? Relatives? Mom. Moms? Dad?
Grandma.
Granny? And somebody else?
Josephine Gardner.
Oh, not a bad source.
But not for me.
Mm-mm.
I only heard those when I read them in golden books.
That's right.
Because my parents, grandparents, it was not a story, they didn't know any of those.
No, they didn't. That's right. So what we think of as part of the really the body social isn't always, not really. We assume that the mainstream traditions within the land that we live are universal. Oh, but they're not. The story may be universal, and there are several versions of, for instance, Red Riding Hood that are very nice, that have nothing to do particularly with Western culture. So those stories, the ones that you know so well, that have done for us what stories should do, which is become inculcated in everything that we know. That's the way stories work, right? You hear them, and they're yours. And then you can tell them again with all the implied values. But that's not true for every ethnic group or culture within this land by any means at all. So part of what you do as ambassadors is to decide how you can reach a variation, many variations, fortunate us really, of cultures and languages and traditions in this place where you do your work. Lovely challenge, but challenging sometimes. Can you think of a variant of Little Red Riding Hood? Think of one that is not particularly Western European. How about Cinderella? Another Cinderella, can you?
I'm not sure. Red Riding Hood or Cinderella. There's an Asian version where I think it's Little Red Riding Hood, where they're working as a group to free her, to free whomever they're freeing.
Yes, there is actually.
They all go and kill the bull. I mean, I've heard many years ago.
Yeah, I think I will remember by the end. I bet Elizabeth will too. You think? I know it's going to bother the two of us for the rest of this session.
Chinese Red Riding Hoods.
Yes, 3. There are also, as I say, thousands and thousands of Cinderellas, but in all of them, there's enough cultural information to honor the culture as well as to tell a tale which is accessible because of the very nature of the plot. Like the story I told you. It's kind of nicer if you have all the details, but it's accessible on almost any level. But you have stories that you have to tell and take from the page that were not written down for you. Was that their goal? No, not usually. The goal was to collect material from what used to be called foreign lands. And as I said before, who do you think did that collecting? Westerners for sure. Any particular flavor? Anybody else? Anything else? Missionaries, scholars, anthropologists, journalists, tradesmen sometimes. Yeah.
Hyphenated cultural crossovers. I mean, Japanese Americans, Indian Americans.
Yes.
People who came,
Yeah.
who were in a Western culture and said, my traditional culture.
Yes.
I bring it.
Sometimes, yes. Way back, when you could actually collect stories, write them down, bring them back to Europe, and fuss around with them, and then get them published, right? Because there was several periods of time in the past, some in the 1800s, when stories had quite a vogue. It's a little hard for us to realize this. They were hot sellers. Times have changed now. Disney's a hot seller. It's kind of our cultural difference, you might say. But when folks came back, especially missionaries and the wives of missionaries, who were bestirring themselves being holy and washing a lot of dishes, but they had time sometimes to elicit stories, right? But they had to make them palatable to the audience for which they were being translated. And who might that be? Us, not members of the culture from which the stories came. So what happens to material when you hear it outside the culture? You're outside the culture, you hear it. You translate it in your own brain, that is, translate it from that language to your language, let's say English, and on the other hand, you do some tweaking and monkeying around to make it readable and understandable to that audience, and then you have to make it decorous. Decorous.
You have to make it culturally specific and different too. I mean, you need to.
Not then so much.
Oh, well, I was thinking of the Chinese pigtail and stuff.
Oh, sure. But in those days, it was just taking the story as it was, writing every story down, believing they were all valuable, which speaks well for our ancestors, but at the same time, making it understandable and interesting to the culture from which the translator came, not the culture from which the informant came, right? Well, that's a pretty big, tall order, don't you think? And how much it remains, would you say, on the page? I mean, from the first source, right?
50%.
Maybe 50%. And so, storytellers, conversely, you, have to take versions which are not oral necessarily and are not from informants in that culture, get it off the page, infuse it with enough life and enough juice to make it alive without committing some kind of cultural, fratricide.
Also, what's missing is everything that everybody in the original culture knew already.
Exactly. Thank you. That's right. Particularly the kinds of things that don't appear in traditional material. There was once a man who had a wife. They had 3 children. She worked hard and so did he. Because we know, as members of the culture who are hearing that story, among other things, it's been told 3,000 times. We know that story because we know that story. But also, we don't need, for instance, physical details usually. We don't. We're in there. We don't need to know what people are wearing. We know what they're wearing. They're us, right? And that means that when you read a version, important thought coming now, very profound. If you add those details as the translator, way back, you're writing it, remember, for somebody else outside the culture, right? So you want to put in all those lovely details. Silks, cottons, woolsey, linsey, so all sorts of things. But when you put that in the story, how's that work for you when you're telling it? Is that working well for you? I don't think so. The level of detail which is needed when you cannot hear the story and see the story being made alive is cumbersome. By the way, you can always tell when that's happened in a story because there are too many adjectives. No, I mean it. There are too many adjectives. So, once there was an old man. He was really old. He had big ears and hair that came out of them. He wore ragged clothing. He had a hat that was red and pink always. He was a farmer. He grew in soil that he had to till because it was poor soil. His shoes were worn, they were leather. You still with me? No, you're gone, aren't you? Haven't you gone down the road now? Bye, Miss Gay. So when you find stories that have been filled in visually for you, the new reader, you find stories that are even less tellable than they were before. And your job would be what?
Clean it up.
Clean it up. But you clean it up from a Western perspective. Here's a tricky one. What's important to clean up and what isn't? And can you honor the culture from which it comes if you don't know why that thing is in there, whatever that thing is? It's in there. What do you do with it? You don't know what it is. Yeah. And you have this problem many more times than most people. Many, many more times. So let me give you an example and you play with it. You can fill in the blanks now, yourself. Just going to give you a tiny, tiny plot outline. Tiny. Going to need to write this down. Boy, that's something I hardly ever say. We're going to make it as simple as possible. You'll know the story already, so it's no big whoop. But what you're going to do is see if you can find a way to incorporate cultural information in the story. Now you can let your storytelling selves for the Asian Museum go. You can just play with this if you want to. Okay, ready? Once there was a girl, and she was in a home with her stepmother. Note to self: don't tell stepmother stories that are nasty people unless you have to. Please, please find another story. By the way, why do you think they're so nasty in all these stories? Because it's the truth? Whoa! Well, that settles it then. Who knew? Any other reason they might be so nasty? So wicked? You sure?
It's edible.
It is, yes it is. It is edible. Any thoughts?
But it's also non-conventional. I mean, the convention is to stay married, husband and wife.
Yes, that's true.
And you can't say nasty things about a real mother.
That's right. Because that's who she is. That's who she is. It's who she's always been. She's the other side. You can't say about the mother that she took those little kids, whacked them out in the forest, told them to make their own way, and screw those little breadcrumbs, just get lost. Not acceptable, we wouldn't want to hear it. And in terms of motif, that's not a prominent one in most cultures. It really isn't. We like mommies, and we try in those stories to venerate them, make them interesting, but they're good guys. But if she's one step removed, she's the other side, then she can be as wicked and as bloodthirsty as we wish her to be. And those of you who are mothers or fathers, who are you to say nay? Isn't there the other side in you? Huh? Depending on the morning? Depending on the number of lunches that you have to slam out the door with the children? Always full of comforts, were you? Or did you have a little moment where you did a little nasty switch? And there she is. She's in there. She's in all mothers and fathers. She's in all parents. She's in all adults. The trouble is to keep her underfed. Well, she does actually have to be bad. She does. In dozens and dozens and dozens of traditions, she is bad, but not all. In Western traditions, oh yeah, she bad. Because she's useful. And because she does represent the other side, the dark side. She does. How about witches? How do they figure? Ever hear a story with a good one?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Traditional story with a good one? No, it's not. Traditional stories with a really cool witch. Nice, kind, loving, good neighbor, doesn't eat the kids.
Baba Yaga is kind of clever, kind of interesting.
Well, Baba Yaga is a pretty tough customer, but she's admirable. Yes, she is. Baba Yaga, the Russian version and the Tartar version on chicken legs, which can turn like this. But she's not a nice guy. She's a moral guy. She is what she is. When you tell children stories like this, it's amazing to me how many times we feel, and it's perfectly understandable, we need to protect children, that's our job, really, from that which might harm them, that which might frighten them for no reason, right? That's true. So I've seen some stories about, and I know librarians here have as well, where the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, not only does he not chow down on anybody, Instead, he comes right in, sits down for dinner. No, it's true. Because we don't like the idea for the children that they're not nice to Brother Wolf. Right. But kids, with all the things built in all sorts of cultures, they know he ain't your friend. They know that. They're like, what? What? He's coming to dinner? What? We're the dinner. It doesn't protect the children. They know already. And why do they, though? Considering the symbols, the number of symbols, the number of archetypes in the stories which you know and which you will tell, why is it, for instance, that the wolf is such a bad guy?
The caricatures are very mean. Caricatures tend to be very mean.
Yeah, very mean.
You already have two good characters in the story, grandmother and grandmother. You gotta have.
Well, that's true. You do have to have a protagonist and an antagonist, mostly.
I think one of the reasons is that these stories help children cope with the quote-unquote evil and bad in the world. And they do this through story as much as anything else.
That was Bedelheim's view. Yes, it was. Yeah.
And he's animal. He's raw nature, power, whatever, as opposed to family and, you know.
He ain't your dog.
And they're already born human beings, so that internally they've got the light sides and the dark sides in themselves they're struggling with.
Always. Always. That's what happens when we birth a child. From that moment that we birth that child declares her intention to move on. To move on. And indeed, both her halves move on. The wolf, but in Western culture, the wolf is all appetite. Isn't that a good word for it? And by the way, he's usually male, and all appetite. Ravening, insatiable, uncompromising appetite. And the kids know that. They do. They want it to be fair. And in your own stories, as you tell them, you would be wise to look, especially with stories for little guys, you'd be wise to look and see what kinds of ways a character begins and is a darker side, a darker guy, someone whose job is not exactly to line folks up and go to Sunday school. No. So, the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, bearing in mind that some stories were never meant for children. They were meant for older children, but they were never meant for preschoolers, which is what we do. We think everything fanciful goes to the nursery. We're a very immature culture that way, for real. So, we figure we got to have them for little kids. You won't find a lot of versions for third graders, will you, of Little Red Riding Hood? Not many. Not the authentic one, which involves the wolf and a great deal of sexuality. A great deal. Remember, he's all appetite. He's all about consuming, absorbing, and conquering. So that story has very, very thinly veiled sexual overtones. In fact, they ain't exactly overtones, they're right there with you. And it involves a number of things which are distasteful to an uninitiated audience, where that character doesn't fulfill quite the unseemly role that he does in that story. Little Red Riding Hood says, I need to go to the bathroom. She's in bed with the wolf. The wolf says, basically, yeah, not so much. She says, but I do. And he says, in the story, well, pee in the bed. Heard that version, have you? Have a picture book of that version, do you? No. I don't think so. So in the stories that you tell now, where is that wolf, I wonder? Or his brother? Where are the creatures in the stories who have to play a role that is the best role of all in all literature, the bad guy. And where is he? And do you know who it is? Is there enough cultural information available to you to know what the relationships are between those characters in the stories which the children are fortunate to hear? Questions, comments about anything so far, and then you got a little job to do.
You know, I have told the real version of Red Riding Hood to high school kids,
Mm-hmm.
and then asking them, what do you think the lessons were with that? Because in the real version, the woodcutter's not there.
Mm-mm.
And never, but
That's right.
just get a bang out of it because, you know, and most of the time they don't get it. One expression you got, and it's when Grandma says go and pee in the bed. I say every flag of red is up because Grandma wouldn't say that ever. And then don't wait for somebody to get yourself out of a mess.
Yeah.
Wait to be rescued.
That's right. That's right.
And then what they love is although Red was this far from a wolf, and she couldn't tell the difference between Grandma.
Really? Yeah, you know, hello.
Red wearing.
Hello, I
He
mean,
was a good looking wolf.
you must have been, man. But see, the children know. They know. They know. They don't have to be even told some of that stuff. But it is wise to choose your audience carefully. And that, no, truly. And that is true for you, too. Because little bitty guys, if you have them, it's a good thing you mostly have school-age children. They're prepared. They're prepared for those dark moments. You know why? Because they've been on the playground at recess. I have a friend who was a teacher for many years, and she'd say to parents, they'd say, I think, Johnny's having trouble with someone who is a bully. I think I'm going to come and just be there for him and kind of observe. I'll be very quiet. And my friend would say, there are some things in life that you should just never really see close up. One of those is sausage and the other is kids at recess. Because they play out quite a few archetypal pieces of crap on that playground. Let's take a barely 8-minute break. Be back when the big hand is at the 10 a little bit.
You know your audience.
I do. And don't be late.
You should have said a 5-minute.
Yeah, that's right. I thought that the minute I said it.
Get a lot here on good and bad animals is that, as you probably know, dragons are bad in all of Western fairy tales. And
Of course they are. But
St. George has the slam.
Oh,
and
every
back in
time.
The village. In Asia, they're good.
Yes,
They're
they
very
are.
good. Look, they're
oh
good.
yes, they do.
And if you ask a group of children, when you're looking at a dragon, we've got a lot of dragons in here.
Yeah, you do.
What is this? Dragon? A dragon's good. Good, good, bad, 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 bad. It's always.
Isn't that wonderful?
And they're all right.
Of course they're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I was the one that I never thought of them as good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they sure are.
Until
Life-saving
way
many
into
times.
Yeah. Anyway,
You know what I wanted to mention?
Good example, by the way.
yeah.
Our culture is just sort of washing things down.
Always.
It's really frustrating. And I've discovered when people, they're reading their stories or they're writing a story, they never want to take the responsibility today, if you watch it, in being in charge of the story. They always want to tell it from someone else's point of view.
Interesting.
Because, and then oftentimes if it doesn't work, you can change one word in the story, that one word, I descended the steps, and all of a sudden the whole story becomes alive. But when you're saying she and this and that and dodge around it, it doesn't work.
True.
You know? I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny, but listen to the thing, it's just amazing. If you
Oh, it is.
But anyway, you're terrific, I love it.
Well, it's the company I keep.
You know, this was wonderful. I came for several reasons. One is I'd love to hear you, but you know, I've been around a long time. And I say, well, I can always learn something from Gay. I can learn lots from Gay, not just something.
Thank
I'm
you.
thinking, oh, this was really great. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. But
Lymphedema?
yes, how'd you guess?
I'm a survivor.
Oh, okay. And I hate the word survivor.
I know.
I don't use it. I mean, I had this.
Just a teeny bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Still holding it at bay, but
yeah. Well, you know, I had the original cancer surgery in 1973. Okay.
Lymphedema.
Yeah.
lymphedema, yeah. But I didn't get this until the 90s. I got an infection.
that's a good idea, actually.
Well, no, if I don't wear this,
Looks like Michael Jackson's glove.
No, my hand. I've been to Austria 3 times in the 90s for lymph drainage. I get lymph drainage a couple
yes.
times a month because I was fine. Don't ask. But that's.
I have another friend in the
understand.
same. Oh,
Yeah, yeah. But
I have a quick question.
Of course.
To break right away.
no, that's all right.
I would like you to address the fact, because I feel like you, that I don't, this idea of protecting children, for example, they say, well, don't say Shiva took the sword and cut the head off.
why not?
That's what I feel.
I tell them.
No, I think so too.
No, but the point I wanted to make was, please give us ideas where you don't injure the psyche of the kid, but also don't demolish the story, because the point is
right.
lost.
Yeah, it
So
is.
That's what I want.
Why don't you pose that question right away?
Yeah. I go to prom with a friend, anyway, and we just took a wonderful course from a guy whose name is Tom Lewis, who is a neuropsychiatrist at UCSF.
I know exactly who he is.
Well, this course was on storytelling.
Oh, yes.
Oh, it was
Oh, yeah.
and the brain and
Yes.
all kinds of fascinating
Yes,
stuff.
it is.
Really, yeah.
Oh, I love his work.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
it is great.
Yeah, it's very.
Yeah, he's well worth seeking out.
Yeah, but he does all kinds of brain stuff. But the
He
storytelling
does.
stuff and living in the matrix, and you don't really. I mean, it's
See,
incredible.
isn't that fabulous?
Oh, it was. Well, you know, the more knowledge you have, the thing that
Yes.
I've learned is the more knowledge you have when you come to quote unquote a workshop, the more you get out.
Oh,
of
of course it is. Absolutely.
it. Yeah, because when yeah, exactly. So this is really, I'm really enjoying.
It's nice to see you
It's
again.
good to see you. It's good to see you. Anyway, okay.
Pretty slick top you've got there. I'm like a magpie. I love shiny things.
I do too. I have this in red also.
Oh.
Talbots. I got it last year.
Talbots.
Talbots.
Pretty racy for Talbots.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, although these pants are Talbots, they're old and they're kind of out of style. But you know what?
Oh,
I can't
hey.
throw everything out of style out. Or
No,
we're
I mean,
clothes.
no.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Exactly.
A couple cushions too.
As a teacher, I have a very good friend who tells stories at the Redwood City Library. And so the two of us, you know, have discussed this many times. As a teacher, there are a lot of storytelling books. And then,
Oh, excuse me.
so anyway, the things you said.
No, I just want, excuse me.
No, right ahead.
I just want to say how delighted I am to hear you.
Thank you for saying so.
Beautiful.
I'm so delighted to have such elegant and wise listeners. I'm not sure who's getting the better deal, me or you. For sure.
So, you know, we've often talked about that because when you're telling stories in a public library, your audience here,
You're telling me.
Yeah, you've done that, eh?
About 30 years, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe you know her. Her name is Sue Mikowitz.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
We all kind of know each other.
Yeah. Well, Sue and I are friends, and in fact, Bravery McGuire, who did Wicked, is also a friend of ours, and they're all going east this weekend.
Lovely.
Yes, except it was so cold when I was there last weekend. I think
Yeah, a little early.
yeah, I felt that. Do you want me to help
I do.
pass this out?
Is here for your tables?
I worry about the kids today that do nothing but this and look at nothing.
Oh,
but
for
visual
God's sake,
things. And I wonder.
It's horrifying.
And when when you tell a story, they know what in the world they're. I mean, can they visualize?
Oh, I think so.
I think they.
Oh, yeah, no,
But I mean, they're just.
It's in there.
Constant there. It's in there.
It's a
It's
difficult-
up to us to bring it out.
Yes, it is. And the difficulty is yeah, that'd be great. Oh, thank you. Thank you. The difficulty is that they don't have a lot of practice
No, they
in
don't.
sustained listening.
No, they sure don't.
And as storytellers, we have to know that and not take offense. But you know, their ability to learn is based, honest to God, it's based on the ability to survive. I mean, down in the heart and soul of us, we got to be pretty alert to keep ourselves alive in the old way.
Yeah.
You know, in the amygdala, it says something's bad, get out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
Really,
Exactly.
truly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's in there, but we do have to free it. It's true.
Yeah. Anyway.
Oh God, it's so good to see you again.
Running around.
Nice coat.
The shop.
Love it.
Frank's sister.
So I remember that you wrote an article about
Along these lines.
along these lines, and you used Turkish salt.
I brought it with me.
Did
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
You brought the article with you? Oh, okay. What was it, SLJ? Because I kept meaning to look
No,
at it.
the yarn spinner.
The yarn spinner. Oh.
Yeah.
So, because I was thinking I should go home and look it up and have Karen duplicate it.
Oh, lovely.
Is that good?
Oh, of
Is that-
course.
Okay.
Of course, and there are three. And one I think I had read it for several years. One is Inanna, which of course is the one where she, you know, she goes after the kids who've been swallowed by the elephant, and yeah, she turns out to have a very interesting history, which is totally gone in most of the versions. And yeah, one is my total fave, the rooster. Oh, I love that story. Love that story. Such a wonderful story.
I wish I could Asianize it.
I know. I'm sure there must be a variant.
Actually, kind of related somehow is the Rum Pum Pum Blackbird.
Yeah, it is actually.
Which is Indian.
It is. Good one.
And I love that
Yeah, I
story.
like that story
And
too.
And it's such a good story to tell here.
Yeah.
Where you're telling these really robust, fabulous Hindi stories, but you need something else. I mean,
Oh,
you
you
also
do.
need to say, you know, it wasn't all about, wasn't all this highfalutin and
No.
overwhelming.
Well, I think so too, and that's a very nice antidote. That's the only. I think that's a challenge you guys have that is really serious challenge to be able to find the points of connection for little guys.
You want to know the real challenges. It's that now we have all this money to work with preschoolers. So we're planning, we're scripting programs that are like an hour and a half.
Oh no.
What's
the matter with
so
them?
last year, so this year, they're down to an hour and 15 minutes. And
Oh my
like
God.
15, 20 galleries. No, so I'm working on it really hard.
Well, yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you're there to. Well, really, to disabuse them. That's ridiculous. What? Oh, how irritating.
Yeah. And it's really not Ed. It's the head of the Asian.
It's definitely not
saying
from
this,
you guys.
but- right.
Doesn't have any preschoolers in.
But there's some great stories coming out of it. Like I had a group of 3-year-olds
Oh, the perfect life form.
and our route took us to end up on the 3rd floor escalator going down. The first couple kids froze, and then their teachers froze.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't like that. Actually. They didn't like it.
And
No.
then by the time they were 4,
They're right down there. Isn't that funny? Yeah, they don't like it. It's that ooh part. I'll get 'em. Excuse me, Elizabeth.
Here's your original bag.
Thank you.
And then here are so we're not using these yet.
No. Close, but not yet.
You let me know and then I'll pass them out when.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear the questions.
Yeah, and so literally, there are 12 in here that have only been in training for 2.5 weeks.
Oh,
And
wow.
because I'm doing some of the mentoring. I mean, some of the questions are coming from the trainees.
Yeah, they're good questions. In some ways, it always happens in every group, but it always reminds me of how can I say? The idea of ownership, of a culture's ownership of its own stories. It's just not something that Westerners want to hear. I mean, it's not that it isn't that they're hostile. It never occurred to them, honestly. I mean, it's what we do best, right? We colonize, so.
Right.
Yeah, that's our big skill. We take what we can get, and there's a sense that that people need to think in your training, fortunately, very deeply about what is meant by a particular story, why this is important, what it represents. And I can see that for some people that's just that fast, and for others it must be a fairly steep learning curve.
Well, and you're talking about planters versus pruners?
Isn't that the truth?
Because everybody starts out, I think, as planters.
Of course.
You know, right?
Earnest.
Yeah.
Wanting to do the right thing.
And I just like the stories, but the first story they had to learn actually had 6 lines of rhyme in it. And I thought, you don't have to, it's your story. You don't have to use rhyme if you don't want, but, and of course, I'll try it, and of course it screwed them.
Oh, of course, court screwed them. I think they're very fortunate to have you as a mentor. I do.
Oh.
Friendly and kind, and also, but time to point this little thing out here. Yeah. Rhyme is hard, especially in the middle of a non-rhyming narrative.
Yes.
It's kind of like it's an enormous hole. And then afterwards, sometimes I've seen people who just completely clam. They've been so concerned about getting to the end of the rhyme, and it's like, whoosh, oh my God, the rest of the story's here. Where'd that sucker go?
Yes.
Isn't that funny?
They're so worried about getting up to
Oh,
that
yeah.
point.
It's like,
Yes.
oops.
It's like, if you really want, just repeat the same rhyme.
Sure.
Don't worry about
Just
the
keep
other
moving,
lines.
baby. Yeah. And apologizing, I think. It's good when storytellers stop saying, oh, I'm sorry. No.
Oh, yeah.
Keep moving,
You
man.
never say, oh, I forgot.
Never.
And did you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. Should we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a big hand. Oh, see, they're
30
late.
seconds.
Okay, I'm not sure I can reach everybody. I tried.
Oh, well, you were a good try.
But
These guys, yeah, I think they got
these
it.
are okay.
Okay, well, we'll ask. We have enough, I think.
Yeah.
Do you need more water or something?
I've got 2 right up there. I got a backup. Okay, guys, move it or lose it. Have a seat. Everybody have a copy of this? Yeah? Okay. Read it, please. I will too. Yeah, supposed to read it. How many of you are almost finished or finished? Okay, just about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 3. Okay, guys. What'd you think of that story?
I think the wife should have been grateful someone else was doing the cooking.
Totally. Totally. My first thought. God, send the woman to a spa.
And why didn't she extract more revenge? What's the matter here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that end. Who else? What'd you think of it? Yeah.
Yeah, because
Go ahead.
the bonga and the joji, I mean, they were completely over my head. So I had a hard time
Mm-hmm.
trying to actually go through
Mm-hmm.
the story.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be a series of people who are somehow defeated, then they just sort of go away from it without any comment and without any moral.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? What you got?
Well, this reminds me of another story, just the end of it though, and I think there is something powerful about being able to articulate in front of the people who wronged you the fact that you know it. I think that, however, there's so much else there that, if that's what I was trying to say, which I'm not sure that I may have been trying to make it say something
That it may not say?
that it may not say.
Yeah, that's my favorite, actually.
Yeah.
I like to do that. 1, 2, 3.
I really liked the ending because he who had been mean and nasty got his just result, or as they did it. And she did quite well. And I thought the revenge part was really good. I thought it was a good revenge story.
Yeah, I thought actually she didn't have to do anything more than just talk of her plight, because she had arrived at a station and they were poor and they were still poor. She didn't turn around and say, oh, and now we'll forgive you and give you food.
Well, living well is the best revenge, remember?
But it's kind of ridiculous because the brother was right there when she was drowning, when she was calling to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew the very worst things that they'd done to her
Mm-hmm.
already.
Exactly.
You did.
So I used to read them trying to sort of see, I mean, I was kind of confused, like Fred, because there was a lot of cultural context I didn't have, and I was
Exactly.
looking on the bottom to see, could I figure out like what tradition this was from, was there some, but in some ways it made me think a little bit of, like, I read it thinking, like, why would I want to tell this story? Is there something in here, some message I could find? And I thought maybe it was a little bit Cinderella-ish in the sense that she was doing the labor, she was underappreciated and underprotected, and in the end, though, her virtue intact, she ends up in a lovely relationship
Mm-hmm.
and household.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed like another take on that story from another culture that had a lot of pieces to it that I couldn't understand.
Mhm.
That's the idea that I begin with if I were thinking, what is this story about?
Mhm.
Like, why would I tell it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think it's from
very rigid rules of honor and dishonor, and that's why at the end, her response is so subtle, because whoever knows the story knows that who's been dishonored and who has been shamed.
I particularly like the fact that when they want to cut bamboo, the yogi says, no, come down here in the roots. Now cut in the cut in the roots. Because if you cut from the roots, the voice of the figure will be bigger and stronger. I said, that's. And if you cut from the top, then the tone and value of the bamboo, if you string it, would be higher. So I love that play.
I do too.
Put it out.
Mm-hmm.
Down, put it out.
Mm-hmm.
Marvelous for a music teacher.
Yes, that's right. Anybody else? Yes.
But you see, there is in our country, Philippines, in indigenous mountains, they have a bamboo and they strip it, and that is how they play.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bamboo strip.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I liked the ending because it was a surprise.
Isn't it though?
To say that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a bit like winning without hands. I actually liked that story, and I thought that was a wonderful lesson because it was an implied revenge and it wasn't something wrong and making a hero cry about something. So I actually liked the story.
Yes, last one.
I found this cut at the top, cut at the bottom thing the most confusing thing about the story. Because I didn't see that it had any consequence.
Yeah.
You know, in what happened
Mm-hmm.
afterwards. So that left me puzzled.
If the fisher cut bait.
Fish or cut bait. One of the sayings in my own family. Y'all fish or cut bait.
Another one about getting off the palm.
Well, yes, that was in certain parts of the culture. Did you get have you gotten a hint about where the story's from? Exactly. Well, we know it's bamboo, and it's not, that's, yes. And there is cast, right? Cast, right? Yeah. And of course you have, within your own training, such a rich opportunity for training and for learning about cultures. But the poor devil who picked this up, let's say, without any background, has quite a task, wouldn't you say? Okay, let's look at it a little bit. Tables, you'll be working together just a bit. First, I also, by the way, I like the name of the story. And let me just indulge one of my countless biases. And they're closely held. I like them, I treasure them. Just my own bias. I don't, for some reason, it's perhaps just my own, not reason. I never say the story's title. Never ever. At the end, I probably will say that story is such and such, but I never do it in the beginning. And I'm not quite sure why, except that for me, titling the story is a literary convention. It's not a folkloric convention. And when the stories are told in an organic manner, in a natural manner, it reminds me of the difference between that and the declamation contest in elementary school. The magic fiddle. Not so much. Just a bias. So here's what I want you to do first, having read the story. I want you to take note of, in any manner you wish, underline, whatever, those things about the story that are essential, that the story can't do without. And you can, can't do without. Has to be in your telling of the story.
facts, not necessarily in the same words.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Can I ask you a question? What is a bonga? I'm still stuck on that word.
We don't know.
It's,
From what you're receiving here, you don't know.
so you just take it as is?
In this 5 minutes, not necessarily, but is it something you think you ought to be saying or can't afford to let go until you know, till you've found out?
Yeah, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's hard to go, for me, it was hard to go on with the story
Mhm.
because I was just stuck on that word bonga.
Yes.
I had no idea what it was.
No.
And then when I kind of finished the story, it was like, well, for one thing, I wouldn't tell this story to little kids.
Oh, sure.
It's very difficult.
Part of it is, yes, yes. Got what you got? Let's at least start. Well, let me give a couple more minutes. Yes, it is. Okay, however far you got, let's talk about this. Give me 3 things, 3 items that you have to include in this story. Non-negotiable.
Brothers, sister, and wives.
That's a good threesome. Humans. Human relationships, yes. By the way, of course, notice she's the sister-in-law. She's other.
Pitcher, bamboo, and chief's son.
Anybody else?
The cast, brother, sister, whatever. Second, revenge plot. Third, becoming a fiddle and return.
Mm-hmm. Got your hand up, sir?
Just, I was gonna put 2, just curse and transformation.
Mm-hmm. Nice one. Anybody else? The bonga, the mysterious bonga. Anybody else? Among other reasons, because you don't know what it is. You can't be sure. We can intuit, we can extrapolate, but better not leave that sucker out then. Anybody else?
Well, I think you need the family, the disproportionate family.
Yes.
And you need the God
Mhm.
to step in. And then you need the magic of the fiddle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can sort of divide them into 3 groups. You've got the human, the human characters who have conflict and sin and revenge and so on.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the things, the well, the fiddle, the bamboo, and you've got the sort of mysterious and somewhat supernatural agents.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the
Mhm.
manga. And the Jogi sort of plays in there somewhere, but he's really,
Somewhere or other.
yeah, he's another agent, I guess.
Yeah.
The manga and Jogi are sort of agents.
Well, one of the interesting things is that in this story, as in many, many folk tales, but not all by any means, objects are animate. They're animate. The bamboo has a voice. It speaks. Not only does it speak, but it is listened to. The listener listens, doesn't ignore it, doesn't think something funky is going on. So in this culture, animate doesn't just mean human. It means that which is around you. And tell me this, without reading it again, what's the strong, from the storytelling standpoint alone? Now you know what you have to include, right? We're going to assume that you're going to stick to those three things you've chosen. Anything in there that is dead weight as a storyteller? Anything you can do without? Remember, it's somebody else that's writing it down, so.
The wives' concern about the timing of the meal on the table.
Yeah.
Out. What does the rest of you think? You can do without that? Okay. Anything else you can do without? Yes.
The back and forth of that cutting the bamboo, it's enough to know that the bamboo has a voice and says something.
Yes. Good. You? Same thing.
You compare way down the scene in the water, she can drown a lot more quickly.
After all, she's just a sister-in-law.
I like about this story is the fact that you like kind of repetition of the drowning, and so it goes on and on. And
Yep.
I wouldn't leave anything out of this. I mean, I would just tell it the way it was, because I think everything's
Well, let's
not only essential, but it makes the story more listenable, so to speak.
let's put that in the parking lot right over here. We're going to put that in the parking lot. Is that part you'd like to go in, like to keep and value, or can it be at least made a little more concise? So that's in the parking lot. How about the characters? Anybody you can do without? Anything you can get rid of? It's a long story, you know, kind of. Let's say you're telling.
Family are just sort of, you can discover stuff under his bed. He doesn't really, you don't need the rest of it.
Right? Do you understand what Jeff said? Okay.
It seems to me that it suffices for the Jigo to play for the chief. He doesn't need to play for the family and have that side bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anything else you could do without in a telling that will clutter your story? Yep.
You could do without the yogis fiddling.
Actually, that's culturally, it has a cultural context to the story. And so you would need that because he's like a mendicant who plays the fiddle and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so he needs that as an instrument of his profession.
His livelihood. Yeah.
The remark that she's the wrong hand.
Can you leave it out?
Well, it isn't adding because they get together right in the next sentence.
Say that again.
But it's cultural context because you wouldn't marry someone out of it.
And I think this is very interesting because she understands the cultural ways we don't, and so we're leaving out these essential things, which is
And then you, Elizabeth.
There are 2 refusals to sell the fiddle.
Yes.
You don't need 3.
2 refusals to sell. Twice the fiddle is up for sale, basically. There are 2 refusals. Yeah.
Oh, she fixes her hair and fusses around making that supper at the end.
You know, I'm telling you the truth. Stories, every story, it seems like, on the face of the earth, if you could just find the food and the hair thing, you've got it, man. I mean, there's so much hair and so much food in most stories that we know why it's your crowning glory, even in this one.
But he does have to fall in love with her.
He does.
That's the moment when he sees something that is
something.
So other and so
Mm-hmm.
desirable that
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
he
Mm-hmm.
needs a moment to sort of.
Well, he does. He does. We can't be just by magic. He was struck dumb by the side of her. No.
She understands the culture of it. For us, we have no meaning, but that doesn't have a lot of meaning, but that's usually because we don't understand the intent of the story.
Very likely. Very likely. And for you, as I've said, you lucky guys have such excellent training before you begin to perform your task, and not really perform. But guys, just picking this up, looking for a story desperately at midnight, have to do it the next morning. I don't know how you can make your way through it. However, there's enough in here that we can know. And one of them is it a good story? Does it make? Is it a good story? Regardless of what you know or don't know, is it tellable? It's tellable?
I think that's what Carmen was talking about, wanting to preserve the drowning sequence.
Yep.
That was, you know, there was some pacing and some excitement that was building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That part was
that's right. Even though there's a lot of it. I mean, one doesn't want to be, you know, cold, but it takes her an awful long time to kick the bucket in there. Man, oh man. However, that is the moment. Not the point, not the lesson, none of that stuff. But that's where the story goes. That's part of the story's arc, is right there. That is the dramatic center of the story. And from that event, the story descends to the other side. And then, of course, the denouement doesn't have much to do with that. So, in terms of being a teller, though, just the crass aspect now of finding the dramatic value in a story that's going to be interesting and useful, and it's going to stop the Velcro from popping. Wouldn't you keep it? Wouldn't you keep that? And how many of you would say, keep it in every form, don't pare it down? No, not the whole story, but just the drowning. Keep it. How many of you think, yeah, well, she can drown a little faster than that? We're so impatient, we Americans can't even let the woman drown. Come on, come on.
There's an interesting challenge there too, I think, because she starts out being frustrated because she can't get the water into the pot.
Yes.
And she ends up
Mm-hmm.
being drowned. I mean,
Yes.
There's got to be some moment in that sequence, however long or short it is,
That's right.
when all of a sudden she realizes this isn't about getting the water, this
No.
is about saving my life.
Yes.
You know, when I first read through the story, I thought, my God, this story it's so circuitous, like this. And then as we're all talking about the water, I'm thinking of the water coming up around her, circuitous. And life is that way too. We don't know the end of our lives, even if we, you know, ascend the ladder at IBM or whatever. I mean, our lives are very circuitous, and there's something very lifelike about the story.
Quite.
In that, and the water maybe is at least to let it go around a couple times. The fact she doesn't just fall in the water. There's something, the water's coming up around her, and then she becomes a plant. And then the plant is changed into a musical instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally her husband plays her before he actually sees her. That's cool.
So to speak.
So to speak. He's playing the instrument. Right. I mean, there's some really very interesting things about it.
Y'all are laughing, but, you know,
Yeah.
that's exactly what that is.
I would say an important thing about the drowning is how many times she calls out to her brother.
Yes.
So implicating him as
Yes.
I think it's important about that reminder.
I'm interested, in truth, teasing aside, I'm interested always interested in the number of repetitions for a given act. Very often we're comfortable with the number 3, by the way, of course, the magic number 3, which by no means is Western necessarily, it's ancient, but As you know, many of our native brothers, no, it's 4. It's 4. So here it is long, and 5, that's right. And therefore, I don't fool around with that, by the way.
You're also assuming the brother is physically present. There's nothing to tell you that he's going to the sister.
Good, that's right.
I just want to mention, as a cultural context, even when an Indian girl gets married, it's the brother who is there to guide her. So he's considered to be her helper, or somebody who's going to save her. So that's important to know.
Very.
That we are kind of festival, that the sister ties a thread to the brother as a symbol of his protection all her life. So there is a cultural context.
Don't you love knowing that? Doesn't that inform this story instantly? So the betrayer in this story, the person who truly damages her, is that person who should be her protector. And in doing so, he has violated an unspoken contract and responsibility, but also violated on the most basic level the kinds of filial ties that are sacred in every culture. Yes, and yes.
But there were 7 brothers, and when she's calling out, we assume it's only one there.
I do assume that, yes.
Well, or she's calling out in every one of them.
Oh, could be. Whoa, whoa. Did you hear this, guys? Maybe maybe each brother she's appealing to, from top to bottom. Could be.
When the sister-in-laws and their consolidation had actually called on the Bonga
Oh, yeah.
to do this.
Good.
And even though the brothers are innocent, they don't know what's going on. It's the sister-in-laws who created this.
I'd like in a fair world, I'd like the sister-in-laws to get a little trash. Yeah, I'd like to talk some smack to them. But they are, now this is interesting, they're not particularly relevant except in their betraying act. And then they're like, exit, stage left, gone.
But how is the brother responsible for something that they perpetrate unbeknownst to them?
I think that's one you should answer. Want to repeat it?
How is the brother responsible at the time she drowned for the actions of the sister-in-laws?
You're mistaking that. It doesn't matter whose action it is. If she is being caught in a riptide, she will also call on her brother or Krishna. So the brother is an archetype protector after the fact.
Yes.
So the brother, even when you get married, does his vows. He's like, standing there with the son-in-laws coming, saying, "Better watch out. I'm here to get her back."
So he, even though in the story, it's not tied in, he fails his responsibility.
I'm assuming when she is endangered, she calls her brother, and it is his job to answer, no matter what the circumstances. What the circumstances. The sisters-in-law, collectively, they just get her in, if you'll pardon me, hot water, and then they're gone. That was their job, and they left. But the brother is responsible on every level for every part.
But I can see that point. There's nothing that says retribution should go to this evil, whatever, sister-in-law. There's nothing in the story.
No, there isn't actually. 1, 2, over here.
I was just going to say, back to the drowning that seems so long, she calls out 6 times. So
Yes.
Maybe 6, but the 7th time she dies. And so I was envisioning that she was calling each and every one of them. Each one of the brothers say over each one of them has a very important
Yes. Yes. And you sure make a case for that. However, look at this. And this is the part where translation and well-intentioned collection comes to a slight cropper. So she begins to weep, blah, blah, blah. Being frightened, she began to wail and cry to her brother. But do we take that as gospel? No. No. We don't know. Was it a good translation? Did somebody miss an S? What happened? So this is one of those daring moments where you own it. You have to in some ways make that decision based on perhaps a fair bit more information, but you can make that decision. Here's why though, because you're doing it anyway. You've already done it. You have heard it and interpreted it without a moment's hesitation, which is one of the reasons that interpretation and the more knowledge you have is like a good thing. But we know enough to know that somebody's culpable, and it's probably the elder brother. She may appeal to him first, which would be my guess, and then you could certainly make a case for each brother turning his back in turn as a surrogate for the feckless brother. Yes. You like it? Yeah.
I mean, that is a factor, but I think one thing you cannot leave out of this story is three transformations that occur.
I agree completely.
You cannot get to the end.
Completely.
You actually go through those transformations. I mean, you've set it up with the denials.
Yes.
Right? But then how did you get to the end?
Yes.
You don't get to the end until you explain or tell some sort of truism about the transformation and making it, doesn't matter if it's somewhat believable or based on some sort of cultural fact.
Is this what I'm hearing? You need to make it, you need to comment on that process, that there is transformation in the story,
Yes.
in order to be sure that it's a part of the story, essentially.
Because you can't get to the end.
You can't get to the end.
So I felt I could tell the story with Miriam's observation that it was Cinderella, because in essence, the manga is the fairy godmother, in some sense, because it's the transformation into something else out of the state she was. And the second transformation seems to be already foretold in that first way, because when but in the sisters, or the step sisters, in some sense, sort of doing that. And so that's what sort of convinced me that I could shape it.
I'm pleased to hear that. I'm pleased to see that you are, well, you've articulated the process I think that all of us go through, which is, yeah, okay. So that eventually, by the time you've read it a number of times and thought about it, you find your way to the story. You find a way to make the story yours without doing any kind of, violence to the tale in some way, but you find it to make it your own. Having said that, go ahead. One.
It seems to me that the drowning is a conclusion, and the story gives short shrift to the bridge element that is her resurrection as the bamboo, without which the story doesn't go on from that point.
That's true. That's true, actually. It is true. I think, however, the important part of the story, the one that you absolutely can't do without, by the way, on any level, is truly the last line of that story. Because her triumph, her revenge, her ascension, essentially, into someone who has risen beyond and apart from the betrayal of her family, and has done so and has been rewarded. That's who she is now.
And maybe risen beyond embodying revenge, too.
Maybe. Could be.
Because she's not seeking revenge, maybe she's beyond that because of transformation?
It implies that. It implies that she's a more noble person now that she's, doing well.
Or maybe in India, that is the most.
Excuse me one second.
In the context of the brothers too, that's so strong in the culture that this came from.
Yes.
That this is revenge.
Yes.
She doesn't.
Oh, without a doubt.
Stab it,
Oh,
she doesn't have to.
no.
She has exposed those brothers
That's right.
as failures as human beings.
Yes.
In
Yes, she has.
the most important possible way in this particular country.
Yes, and in the course of the oldest brother, she has essentially destroyed him. He has failed her in every way.
So it's interesting, Miriam thought it'd be a Cinderella story. You drew closer to winning without hands. That was a story of getting your sweet revenge without getting revenge in the traditional sense of the word. So it's interesting how we both
Oh,
story different.
it's the best, isn't it?
Well, she walks away with pride, and he's left.
She walks away with pride and position, actually.
I really see, as Jeff does at the end, that, the shaming of the
Mm-hmm.
you don't need more than that. But I also felt that there was the other thread of her basic goodness. She was fulfilling her responsibility to the family.
Yeah, good.
It's really strongly evidenced in the sweetness of the music. This is not any ordinary music.
No.
Any ordinary violin.
No.
Bamboo. So there's a thread of the depth of her sweetness as well as the shaming of the brother that actually is real and there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's really true, what you said, you said that really well, but what I was thinking of how people listening to it, kids maybe can relate to it, almost unconsciously, that, I'm being picked on now, or things aren't great for me now, but, in the end, I'm gonna be okay, and they're gonna be, and this is sometimes a wish of kids who are having a hard time, or anybody's having a hard time, they'll get theirs, and I'll be on top, and I think that's a really
I know from talking to Fred, or listening to Fred, more likely, that you're going to be, that you tell now to a number of different grades and always in groups, pretty much, right? So tell me the youngest children that you tell stories to.
3.
3 years old? Oh, no, see, I think 3-year-olds are the perfect life form myself. No, I do. No, I really do think that. I do think that. And how high in grades do you go? High school?
Yeah, although really.
Well, yeah, them.
I would say 4th grade,
Mm-hmm.
the bulk will be no more than 4th grade.
Settles in there.
Except for the special exhibitions, but that's.
7th and 8th.
Yeah, but
I have a sophomore from 6th grade.
My friends are excited now about this. Lots of grades and lots of people. I see that, yes. Oh, see? Many variations. Well, this actually,
I'm sorry, there's one more thing I would like, I'm asking myself, so what's this, what is this source? Now, that's another thing I want to know, if I could.
we'll see.
What book did this come from?
We'll see.
Who collected it?
Yes, and even if you don't know now, that's right. That's right. That's right. Who translated? Yeah. Was it who did this? It must have been the Bonga who did that. If you tell the story to little kids, preschoolers now. No? You sure? But what would cause you to say no? Her dying and being reborn? Mm-hmm.
For me, the difference is this whole idea of honor and revenge, which I think is just totally foreign to them.
Yes, it is. That part, they get the drowning in the water part. Oh, yeah. And it depends upon the child, really. 3-year-olds are a deep, deep subject, and I've had 3-year-olds. I've been telling stories to 3-year-olds for 30 years, and I've sometimes had them in a particularly difficult part of a story. Not even me telling. I've had one child go, "No!" Notice that she covered her eyes. Isn't that wonderful? Really. And another kid who said, "Cool." So it's kind of a floating decimal, but it is true that the concept of honor, of familial responsibility on the level in which this story presented is fairly cryptic for kids, for little bitty kids. What's the part in here that they might like, though? She does, and they like that drowning. They like that too. Yeah, they like that too. And how about, Oh, it's way long. And you know what? It's even longer now that we discussed it, isn't it? Isn't that remarkable? It just doubled or trebled. Yes, it did. What's the most interesting part of the story for you that you would like to tell? If you had to pick a section, and magically we could tell you that we'll understand everything about the story, you don't have to worry, what section would you pick to tell? What would you like to tell in this story? What pleases you or compels you?
I'd like to, when we get to the violin, to tell that part.
Mm-hmm.
The fiddle.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like the chief's son, you know, planning, hiding, being curious, planning, hiding himself,
Mm-hmm.
confronting her.
Mm-hmm. Same. Anybody else?
I like the fiddle made brothers cry.
Mm-hmm.
Fiddle made brothers cry.
Mm-hmm. And I have no doubt that that's right. None at all. I like the drowning myself. I'm all over it. I can hardly wait. It's important, though, as amusing as we are collectively, it's important to know what appeals to you in a story. And then appeals is a much more tepid word than I might employ. Where is it that you can't not tell it? Where is that in the story? Where is the point in any story that for you is the sacred moment in that story? That doesn't mean godly. It's the most important and meaningful part of the story. And first thing to ask yourself is, where's the part that I can't do without? And who's in the story that I identify with?
I think when she's drowning and she's asking for help, that's the most important part because it makes the ending even more important. The fact that she is above, she's risen above
Yes.
any need to go any further.
Yes, actually. Yes, that's a good one. I also like it that she has risen above. Help!
No.
Who else?
I think it's the evolution of music.
Yes.
Producing her again, her transformation
Mhm.
from music to a body person. One of the things that
Appeals to you. Not even appeals. That's where your interest automatically goes. Yeah, that's right. Who else? Where?
May I do a little circuitous route to this?
You can.
answer, please? One of the things I think we in the Western culture seem to think death is a very final thing, as if nothing happens after that.
Mhm.
And I think the story sort of speaks to the cultural concept of reincarnation, transformation, re-emergence.
Mhm.
And I think that where she emerges out of the fiddle, that would be an important part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? What's the one that is the most arresting to you? Yes.
Well, the part of the story that I don't like is where she drowns, and then the yogi, or not the yogi, but the goes, and is so pleased to receive her that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I don't care for that. And then, of course, he doesn't keep her very long. She ends up as the bamboo growing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I kind of like the juxtaposition of the tragedy of her dying, of her drowning, and then the kind of humorous element of the yogi kind of here, you know, so that there's, as much as there's sadness, there's also this hope and light and laughter too.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of fun.
It is. That's a moment in the story that has a fair amount of juice, actually. Anybody else? You got a moment that you... And by the way, at least for me, in my humble opinion, I don't... the standard advice among storytelling educators is there are two pieces that are sort of joined. One is that you should pick a story that you like. You have to like the story. And the other is, don't ever tell a story that you don't like. Well, that seems sensible, right? I'm not so sure about that. No. There are stories that I have told And I tell them, or have told them, because I'm not really sure what it is that binds it to me. I don't know. I'm not sure. And there are some stories that are disturbing, not in every aspect. And I can't forget them. They stay in my mind and stick there for quite a long time, and so then I do tell it. And this is the swoony, Berkeley-esque part of the workshop now. Yeah. And it's in that telling repeatedly that I discover why or what it was. I can't do it any other way. So sometimes when you like a story, that's great. I mean, the story can't but benefit from that. But do remember that your own responses reveal often something that is more nuanced than, I like it. Something that is, I can't get this story out of my mind. That sort of thing.
And have you noticed a difference in your audience when you tell a story that you like versus a story that is nettling you in some way?
Good question. Yes and no. A story that I like, I'm possessive of it. I'm protective of it. I like it. And I want you to like it too. A story that I'm uncertain about or willing to dance with to find out where and in what manner we're going to go steady, it's a much more complex exercise. And I think when I began to think about this, I think I undersold those stories in telling them. I hedged them a little. No more. I don't. I trust, and so should you, I trust my own instinct for finding and retaining those stories in their crotchety way, some of them. And some of them don't end well. I've learned to do that. When I was a very young storyteller, I probably would have put it aside and gone for one that appealed to me, that I liked. And that's fine. But there are other ways to respond to stories that you might listen to and pay heed to. Does that make sense? Good.
So one of the things that happens to us with special exhibitions is we're given a story to tell.
Yeah.
And what I find is I have to find a way to make me like the story, which I think is what you just said.
Yes, in effect.
What you were telling us is that you work your way through until you find a way you can make the story work for you.
And make it your own.
Make it your
Yeah, that's right. And that doesn't happen easily or fast. And it shouldn't. And in some ways, that's one of the difficulties for contemporary storytellers. So we live in an impatient culture, and we're impatient ourselves. And so we have to learn the lesson that our ancestors teach us when we take their tales and tell them, which is that they don't yield to easy or fast results. This is a long game we are playing, a long game. Yes, and then yes.
Just something I'm beginning to learn is that as I experience telling stories, I become more comfortable with stories that I wasn't comfortable initially. And I find that
That's right.
I'm concerned about, because we tell to so many children, how are the children going to react to this? And then I've begun to realize that is really not an issue because they react in a very positive way, even about bad themes. And so I've grown into learning how to accept some stories that I don't normally.
That's very, very valuable. There was a story which, and I know that my dear and old friend Elizabeth knows this story very well. There was a story in my storytelling class. I took a class years and years ago, many years ago, and the story was presented as one that many storytellers told. And I read it, and at the time, I think, it might even been before I was in library school, but I had done a lot of professional work with preschoolers, lots and lots. And I read the story and thought, gee, who would I tell this? This is a dreadful story. It's a dreadful story. Mr. Fox. And a year later, I thought, Is this a honey? People get murdered in it. There are heroines and villains. It's creepy. I loved it. It's dreadful. I couldn't wait. I was all over that story. Would I have been the first few times? No. I couldn't have. And then last one, and then something to say.
I really love this. There's a little drama in it, and then the ending is so nice. And I would like to tell this story. My problem is, where in the collection can I tell it? Where? In the second floor?
I think that's one for you.
Well,
All the screens are gone, the back screens are gone.
There are, well, to be culturally, so we first need to know what culture is this representing, because that will help us to determine what.
Yes, it will.
we need to do first. But I will tell you, and you'll get better at this. The piece of art where you tell it does not have to be this close to the story.
I wouldn't think so.
So I don't think it will ever have, I mean, we can brainstorm, but I don't think that'll be a problem.
Yeah, I think storytellers can make any sort of tangential relationship out of almost anything, and I'm sure you can too.
I just wanted to talk about the stories that we do for special exhibitions. It's really a timing, because to learn the story, when exhibition opens, you have 3.5 milliseconds to be comfortable. All stories sound dreadful.
Yeah.
And it's really that time frame that's tough. 3 or 4 weeks into the exhibition, you go, this is a great story.
That's right.
But it really is hard to kind of get over that hump.
And is that because you haven't received materials soon enough? Is that it?
Well, you don't really see the show until it's open. You can
I
look
see.
at dozens of catalogs and think the piece in the catalog was great, and you look at it and you go, that's pretty dorky. So you gotta ask them to have its own life for you to feel they can speak to the story.
Well, that's true. I think that's an interesting challenge. And I think it's one that other storytellers do face in a variety of, in some variation. I too have told stories within collections, notably in the Northwest and in Canada. And I think we had 20 minutes in the middle of a festival. Okay, rock on. 20 minutes, you're on. And there were many, this is in Canada, in this particular museum, that's the Museum for the First Nations. So, white girls, whoa. We were very troubled and alarmed, but sometimes you have to make hay when the sun shines. And I'm not saying that it's an easy process. It may be a difficult process, and it may have to be like pie crust. Sorry to say it. My grandmother used to say, make pie crust, throw the first one away, start over. Keep that one. So there may be a pie crust part for you, sad to say, but true.
And just a comment with regard to a story like this in particular. There's an actual process for a story to come into our canon of stories that we go into the museum and tell. So the process would be, we would have more information, there would be research before any of us then would begin to adapt it.
Of course. And by the way, the lack of information about where it comes from, it's bona fides. It's not there for a reason. Oh yes, of course. You came in cold to a story that there wasn't enough to know about and had to grapple with it anyway. Very often the case in life.
You can tell us now.
No. Nope.
You have to consult Wiki.
Nope. So, 5 minutes, and in case you thought we were leaving early, I'm fresh as a daisy myself. So we're not breaking early. If you want to slip out, that's fine. Better make it fast, though. First, anything you want to say, anything you're taking home from this session? Anything you're taking home?
How to break down a story.
How to break it down. Mm-hmm.
really.
Yeah.
To figure out what the basic elements.
What's going on.
Keep or
Mhm.
you can throw away.
Mhm.
Some cultural impacts about the story also.
Good.
You shouldn't put elements in that aren't culturally relative.
Yeah, and verifiable. Yeah.
How to make friends with the challenges.
Oh, I like that. Did you hear that? How to make friends with a challenging story. Good. Anything else? What are you taking home?
The three things that I can think of are what must you keep, what can you throw away, and what analogy to something you know can you draw on to make it yours.
Anybody else? Y'all better be taking something. But I can leave you with your own private thoughts. What he said, yeah. I don't want to go after him. One quick thing that someone reminded me of that I will say because I was reminded of it, and it's so true, so true, so true. You can't, as I've said, this is a long game with any story, any traditional tale. This is a long game. You're not supposed to be able to do a fully realized, fully confident, and knowing version of a story the first time you tell it, or the 20th. That's not what stories are. Storytelling is a process of learning, not a process of knowing first. And here's the other part. This is the part I'm going to quote from my own self, from the last time I was here. You're sufficient as you are. Yeah, you're sufficient as you are. There's much, much required of you in this program, and it should be. You are dealing in this program with cultural treasure, irreplaceable treasure. Those stories that we tell ourselves within the culture, those stories that give us our values, our kinships, our way of understanding the world, how to keep ourselves safe. There are endless, endless benefits and endless important moments in stories. But you do not have the responsibility, really, to perform that story. You shouldn't be performing that story. The storytellers in your families, I don't think they were attending any storytelling workshops on performance. I think they were under the car, and I think they were changing the oil and, patching the screen door while they told you stories. But you were attentive, weren't you? They meant something to you. So your job is never to perform a story. It's to receive a story as a gift, and to give a story and to share a story as a gift, because you are the vessel through which that story moves to be given to others. That's why the stories are simple, mostly, in their oral form. Just enough information for you to be able to take it, make it your own, and give it away. And the other thing it's not about, and this is a tough one, it's not about perfection. Stories, traditional stories, have no perfection. They have the possibility of forgetting built in. They have the possibility of scrubbing out and screwing up built in. There's no benefit to perfection in a story because, in the telling of it, because when you do that, it will be lovely. It'll have a porcelain hard finish. But it won't be accessible if you are telling it with yourself behind it, with the interest in sharing it. Okay? You've been good playmates for the day. Very good playmates. Oh, yeah. We're going to give you something as you leave. It's an article that I wrote about story research and stories that have been improperly told sometimes.
Well, Mary Gay,
Yeah.
thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome.
We would like to go back soon.